When a boxer who's out of this world gets literally knocked out by the same referee officiating the game, it makes you wonder what actually happened. Amid a large crowd in Las Vegas in 1998, Bernard Hopkins was fighting Robert Allen, but in the fourth round, he was shoved out by the referee, landing with a crack on his ankle.
Purdy, have you ever seen anything like this?
Yeah, I saw. Let's stop.
Why did the referee do such a thing? Did he have anything against Hopkins, or was it a game of plan? Before we get into what happened that day, let's introduce our two fighters and see what they've achieved before this fight. Meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Hopkins wasn't always a champion. He started out in the rough streets of Philadelphia, growing up in the Raymond Rosen housing projects. Life didn't exactly deal him the best hand. Sure, he showed early promise in boxing, winning the Philadelphia Junior Golden Gloves by age 9. Impressive, right? But things took a dark turn. By 13, Hopkins wasn't just surviving the streets, he was part of them, mugging people and carrying the scars of street life, literally. He got stabbed 3 times before even hitting high school age. It was clear he was on a dangerous path, and it didn't take long before the law caught up. Hopkins found himself behind bars, staring down a future that seemed to have no way out. He spent nearly 5 years in prison. Think about that for a second. For 5 years, he was locked up. But something changed during that time. When he was released in 1988, he wasn't just free from prison, he was ready to fight for a different life. Hopkins didn't waste time. He jumped right into the professional boxing world. But his debut was a disaster. October 11, 1988, Atlantic City, New Jersey. He faced Clinton Mitchell and lost. For most people, this is where the story would end, but not for the executioner. After taking 16 months off, he returned as a middleweight in 1990 and won his next fight against Greg Page. Between 1990 and 1992, Bernard Hopkins was unstoppable. 21 fights, 0 losses, and he knocked out 16 of his opponents. Even crazier, 12 of those knockouts came in the very first round. Hopkins wasn't just winning, he was demolishing people. Fast forward to January 31st, 1998. Hopkins was gearing up for his 7th title defense against Simon Brown, a former world champion in 2 weight classes. Brown had a solid past, holding both the WBC and IBF welterweight titles, but his best days were behind him. He'd lost 4 of his last 7 fights and was reportedly boxing just to pay the bills after going bankrupt. For 6 brutal rounds, Hopkins controlled every second of the fight. Then came the 6th round. Hopkins landed a left jab followed by a crushing right uppercut that sent Brown to the ground hard. Brown, to his credit, got back up, but it was clear this fight was done. Hopkins trapped him on the ropes and unleashed a flurry of punches that left the referee no choice but to stop it. Another win, another title defense in the bag for the executioner. Now, here's where things got interesting. After this fight, Hopkins didn't engage in, I'll say, a serious fight for up to 5 months. But that changed when he faced Robert Allen. But how did they get fixed to fight each other? What really happened? See, Robert Allen is actually a tough contender from Stone Mountain, Georgia. Nicknamed Ardent and Dangerous, Allen missed out on a spot on the 1992 U.S. Olympic boxing team when he lost to Raul Marquez in the trials. Allen wasn't just some random guy, he was the IBF's #1 contender, riding a 5-fight winning streak. So this was a big deal. A week earlier, at a press conference in Las Vegas, things got heated. Hopkins and Allen got into a shoving match, drawing more attention than anyone expected. These two weren't just going to fight, they were ready to tear each other apart. The tension was electric at the press conference. It might not have been staged, but let's be honest, it had all the drama. The moment the promoter rushed the video to TV stations and notified the papers, you knew this wasn't your typical pre-fight routine. Real or not, it was a publicity goldmine. Allen wasted no time stirring the atmosphere during the conference. He said he would be stepping into the ring with the ex-champ, the executioner, or whatever they call him. That was extreme. He wasn't just disrespecting Hopkins, he was relishing it. Allen talked about the fight, bragging about how he was going to snatch the IBF middleweight title right off Hopkins' waist. Hopkins didn't let that slide. He shot back. Now, when it comes to fighting, intimidation works sometimes. But what matters is what happens in the ring. And then Hopkins, ever the straight shooter, delivered a brutal reminder. Speaking of how Allen quit in the ring against Barbosa, he went forward and told him, if you don't want to get hurt, maybe you should quit right now. With that, that's how you shut someone down, right? But it didn't end there. Hopkins wasn't done, not by a long shot. He leaned in and he said, one thing for sure, this fight won't last long. It's going to be over quickly and early. Allen's trainer, Pepe Correa, couldn't resist jumping into the issue. He told Hopkins that he's going to eat so many left hands he won't believe it. At that point, Hopkins wasn't just taking on Allen, he was fighting his whole team. At this point, Hilton security was edging closer, ready to step in if things got physical. However, Allen leapt from his seat, charging towards Hopkins. They didn't get close enough to throw punches, but the intensity was off the charts. Trainers, promoters, and security all had to step in to keep the peace. But the damage was done. This fight wasn't just about a title anymore. It turned into a personal war. The Hilton's fight card had just gotten the adrenaline shot it needed. With legendary Roberto Duran facing William Jaffe in another main event, it was Hopkins and Allen who stole the spotlight. And come that night, all that talk would either explode into victory or be crushed under the weight of one brutal final punch. You see, Hopkins knew the game. With a record of 34-2-1, he wasn't just the champ, he was a seasoned veteran. The odds had him as the clear favorite at -650, for good reason. He'd been there, done that. But Allen, with a record of 22-2, came in as a +400 underdog. The numbers alone painted the picture. Hopkins was the king of the middleweight division, and Allen was just the latest contender trying to knock him off the throne. But there was something in the air. Art Manteris, vice president of the Hilton, said he'd been hearing whispers that Allen was on the rise, but he thinks Hopkins is one of the 2 or 3 best fighters in the world. There isn't anybody who can beat him at 160 pounds. Manteris wasn't wrong. Hopkins was a machine in the ring. Apart from his first ever fight, the only man to defeat him was Roy Jones Jr. back in 1993. And since then, Hopkins wants that rematch. His manager Dan Goosen was already looking ahead. But before any talk of Jones could happen, Hopkins had to deal with Allen. And while everyone thought Hopkins had this in the bag, the press conference left a sense of uncertainty in the air. Maybe, just maybe, this fight wasn't as predictable as it seemed. On August 28, 1998, at the Las Vegas Hilton, it was fight night. Hopkins, weighing at 159 pounds, and Allen, making the 160-pound limit, were ready to go. This was supposed to be Hopkins' 8th title defense, but nothing in boxing ever goes as planned. With pressure mounting, everyone expected a routine Hopkins victory, but there was an edge to this fight. Allen wasn't just there to fill a spot on the card. He was there to prove a point, to upset the balance, and to knock the champ off his pedestal. Having something to prove, he was dedicating his fight to his late trainer, Abdulmalik Muhammad, who tragically died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. You see, this was about more than just punches for Allen. It's personal. He also got a tattoo for his trainer and everything. That shows some heartfelt dedication. But if there's one thing about Bernard Hopkins, it's this. When the lights are brightest, when the pressure's at its peak, that's when he thrives. Hopkins was coming off an impressive streak, but his last few fights have raised questions about whether he's starting a bit slow. Would Allen pull off the unthinkable? Or would Hopkins once again show the world why he is the king of the middleweights? One thing was for sure. The press conference had done its job. All eyes were on this fight, and the tension was unbearable. The only question left, who would be standing when the final bell rang? Now, back to the fight. Round 1 kicks off, and what do we get? A lot of posturing and circling. Both men were waiting for the other to make the first move, like 2 cowboys in an old western shootout. Hopkins is known for his conditioning and counter-punching, but he's looking almost too relaxed. Was he thinking about future fights with Roy Jones or Oscar De La Hoya? Maybe. Allen was trying to stick to his game plan, looking for any holes in Hopkins' defense. And Hopkins, with a slight grin on his face, showed that he was not worried. Round 2 started, and here's where things got spicy. Hopkins lands a solid right hand, and Allen responds with some dirty boxing, rubbing laces in Hopkins' face, trying to mess with his head. But this isn't a bar fight, so referee Mills Lane steps in and reminds them both, keep it clean. But come on, this is boxing, and we all know it'll get messier before it gets better. By the 3rd round, the crowd's energy was already buzzing. Allen tried to push Hopkins, even throwing a few low blows when Mills Lane wasn't looking. But Hopkins isn't having it. Both fighters are pushing, shoving, and trying to show dominance in the clinch. Hopkins' punches started landing cleaner, but Allen was still hanging in there, swinging wildly, maybe hoping for that one punch to change the fight. Then, Allen throws a straight left hand that pushes Hopkins into the ropes. Hopkins tried to respond with a sneaky straight right, but it was blocked. The energy was starting to shift, though. Allen lands a solid overhand right on Hopkins' head, and suddenly, Allen was getting some momentum. He's the aggressor now, and while neither is exactly lighting up the scoreboard with punches, Allen's pushing the pace. So far, this round looks like it belongs to Allen, with the commentators clearly impressed. In round 4, Allen came in hot. He tried to build on his earlier success, and Hopkins couldn't wake up because he was letting Allen take control of the fight. And just when you think Hopkins is gonna fire back, he doesn't. He's still a little too tentative, letting Allen dictate the pace. But here is where things go from intense to just plain weird. Out of nowhere, Hopkins gets launched out of the ring. And no, it's not because of some monster punch from Allen. It's because the referee, yes, the referee accidentally pushes him out. Hopkins goes tumbling out of the ring, dropping about 3 feet to the ground. I mean, can you imagine? The crowd's in shock, the commentators are losing it, and Hopkins was just laying there like, what just happened? And it's not like there were any soft cushions waiting for him. No, Hopkins hits the floor hard. Can the fight even continue? Is Hopkins injured? Is this match over? Hopkins was visibly shaken. You'd be too if the ref threw you out of the ring. While still there on the ground, Hopkins declared he wants a rematch, despite seeing him being assisted while he limped on his feet out of the arena. The boxing fans were waiting for the results. The match was declared a no contest because obviously you can't lose your championship by getting pushed out of the ring by the ref, right? Despite keeping his IBF middleweight title, there was a sense of unfinished business hanging in the air. The bad fight wasn't going anywhere, and a rematch was inevitable.
He came toward the apron and Bernard fell out. I could hear the crack when he went down on the deck. I know this man. I've watched him fight. I watched him train. No way is he a quitter. It was going to be a rough, tough fight.
After 6 months, the two were set to meet again on February 6, 1999. This time, the stakes were even higher. Allen had picked himself up after that bizarre first bout and knocked out Abdullah Ramadan in 1 round to claim the interim IBF strap. He came into this rematch with all the confidence in the world, believing that he'd rattled Hopkins in their first fight. But little did he know, Hopkins was not about to play around this time. He was out to make a statement. From the opening bell, it was clear that this was a different Hopkins. He was sharp, aggressive, and relentless. The first real moment came in the second round when Hopkins slipped inside and delivered a devastating counter right hook that sent Allen stumbling toward the ground. The crowd went wild. This wasn't going to be another strange, inconclusive fight. This was Hopkins at his most dangerous. Allen tried to fight back, but by the 6th round, Hopkins was absolutely ruthless. A brutal flurry of chopping punches sent Allen crashing to the ground again, and he could feel the fight slipping away from him. And then, in the very next round, it was all over. Hopkins unleashed a one-sided beating that forced the referee to step in and save Allen from any more punishment. The arena erupted in cheers as Hopkins dropped to his knees in celebration, but the victory was bittersweet. Despite proving his dominance in the ring, Hopkins was furious. He felt disrespected, not by Allen, but by his own team. In a dramatic turn of events, Hopkins stormed out of the ring, not even taking a moment to bask in his glory. Instead, he protested loudly, telling Showtime's Jim Gray that he wasn't getting paid what he deserved. For a man who just secured his 9th title defense, Hopkins was feeling more frustration than satisfaction. He believed he was worth so much more, and he made sure the world knew it. Hopkins didn't just win that night. He made a point, both in and out of the ring. He wasn't just fighting for titles anymore. He was fighting for respect, for recognition, and for the paycheck he believed he'd earned. But what do you think? Do you think Hopkins should have continued in the first fight, or was he tired of fighting? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video.